All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Anti-War Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and our last guest on the show today is Jason Leopold. He's got a piece here with co-author Jeffrey K. at Truthout.org, where he runs things. Exclusive. Guidebook to False Confessions. Key document John Yoo used to draft torture memo released. Welcome back to the show, Jason.
Hey, Scott. Great to be back with you.
Good. I'm very happy to have you here. Very important story. Do I have it right? This was not your lawsuit. This was McClatchy Newspaper sued and got this document and didn't do anything with it, so you went ahead and took the ball and ran with it, right?
That's exactly right, at least from what I understand. And, in the land of the Freedom of Information Act, it becomes my scoop.
Gotcha.
So,
sounds good to me.
It is an important document, and frankly, I don't know if McClatchy had requested it for a specific reason, but, you'd have to really give a very, very, very close read to the Office of Professional Responsibility report. That was the report released a couple of years ago that looked at the legal work that went into the preparation of the torture memo that John Yoo wrote and Jay Bybee, his boss, had signed.
Now, we're talking about for people who are new at this is the first Bush administration when Dick Cheney had the lawyers all get together and come up with a reason why it was okay to torture people.
Right, exactly. And buried in that report was a reference to this particular document. So it was, I think they may have included one or two paragraphs. So, the fact that it was requested and eventually cleared for release late last year, and just, again, it was sent to the requester, so no one in the public would know about it until DOD, Department of Defense, posted it on their website. And I took a look at it because, if you recall, you and I spoke last year when I had published the story on Jessen's notes. Bruce Jessen, the psychologist who was the architect of this, one of the architects of the torture program. And so I immediately knew what this document was, how important it is, in discussing the origins of Bush's torture program. And I was, frankly, kind of blown away that it was, that it was released. This is actually the first complete manual from the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, Escape, SERE, the school that U.S. military personnel go to in order to learn techniques, that they may experience if captured by an enemy. So this
you gotta love it too. The just the newspeak of the way the military talks. It's like something. Reading this thing is like, it reminds me of Robert Duvall in THX 1138. The operating instructions, they're called. And there's a scene where he's on the other side of the one-way mirror, and he's got a thingy on his head, and they're torturing the hell out of him. But on this side of the one-way mirror, it's just one guy training another. No, you got it turned up too high. And whatever. It's all just a technicality thing while he's on the other end going, ah! Anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty much what you would read, what you'd learn once reading this. So, this is so important because it's a manual that we know. We now know. We've known that the Bush administration looked at it, reviewed it in May of 2002, but we've never seen what these descriptions were, what they were actually looking at. And it's clear that it's a complete guide to propaganda, exploitation, what U.S. military would experience. So the fact that they used this, that administration used this to twist it, take bits and pieces of it, and use it in the interrogation program, that's the, quote, guidebook for false confessions. And that was actually told to me by Colonel Steve Kleinman, who is a veteran intelligence expert, interrogator, associated in a senior capacity with the whole SERE program. He looked at this and immediately knew what it was.
Right, so let me make sure I understand this thing. Basically, what we have here is the adaptation, this is the document where they have adapted the SERE instructions into how we're going to use it. So in other words, the North Koreans use Mao's Little Red Torture Manual on Americans. And then the Americans came up with this school that's basically what to expect if you're ever tortured by communists, how to resist it, SERE, and including waterboarding and things like that. And then what these Bush administration lawyers did was they took that, training, and I guess the psychologists that they had hired and whatever, CIA guys, they took that training and they adapted it into this instruction manual, how to use these techniques, not to train an American to resist, but to get Abu Zubaydah to claim that he's about to bomb a school in Texas, if that's what George Bush wants on the radio.
That is exactly right, Scott. Perfect summary of what this is. And an important point to make is that in the torture memo, there's 10 techniques, the one that was issued in August 2002. 7 of the 10 techniques come directly from this manual. The most controversial, waterboarding, was not in this manual. However, there is a very detailed description of water torture. They have something called the water pit. You can, be immersed in water, using water dowsing, but, 7 out of 10 made it into, that torture memo. And, where the torture memo, and this manual differ is in the descriptions of the purpose of these techniques. So, we've heard time and again Bush officials say imminent threats. That's why we had to resort to these alternative techniques. And so in the torture memo, it would say, okay, you want to subject a detainee to something called walling, which is basically, slamming a detainee against a wall over and over again. And in the in this manual, this what is called pre-laboratory operating instructions, it gives the purpose. Why a U.S. service member, for example, would be subjected to that. Talks about the psychological effects. It's about insult. It's about humiliation, fear, despair. These are keywords. These are keywords, that revolve around exploitation. That's not about intelligence. It's very clear when you read this document and you hold it up next to the torture memo that, this wasn't about intelligence. That was, frankly, a cover. It was about, exploiting these detainees to get them to say, to admit whatever you wanted them to admit.
And, I didn't just pull that one out of the air, although most people don't have it in their own memory bank. I got it in mine, and I just heard it was a top-of-the-hour radio news thing at some point in the fall of 2002. Orange alert, al-Qaeda may be targeting a school in Texas. Well, Jason, I'm from Texas, and I'm just guessing, but there's probably 75,000 schools in Texas. Could you be a little bit more specific with your threat? But they didn't want to just make these up. They wanted to be able to say they got it from somewhere. So they tortured Abu Zubaydah into saying it. They tortured al-Libi into saying it.
That's right. That's exactly what they did. And, it's really important, and you mentioned al-Libi at this time, is that this is around the time that they were obtaining intelligence, and I use that in quotes, for, their campaign, the pending war that they were putting together against Iraq. So many of these detainees, and I can tell you that, we know that al-Libi was asked those questions. It was to get false confessions about a link between al-Qaeda and Iraq.
Right. Just like the North Koreans got false confessions from their American POWs back in the 1950s, the model for this whole thing, the communists. It wasn't about protecting your local soft target from attack by al-Qaeda terrorists. It was all about getting you afraid enough to let them have their war in Iraq back in 2003. Jason?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Scott. I mean, you made an important point. This is highlighted in the story. This document was shared before that legal memo was issued. And, May of 2002, this is a May 7th, 2002 document. But I want to make clear that it's unconfirmed whether it was accessed on that date, whether it was created on that date, or whether it was filed. Either way, it was a paper that was shared with the principals committee in May of 2002. That was the first of several that took place between May and July. And May happens to be a very important month. It's an important month in the evolution of, the so-called rapport building techniques related to Zubayda's interrogation, led by a couple of FBI special agents into that world of torture. And Ali Soufan, who was one of those FBI special agents that was down at the black site in Thailand, he left. And he writes about this in his book. He's already testified about it. He left in May of 2002. And he said the last straw for him was when a confinement box for Zubayda was introduced. Well, guess what? In this manual that they were discussing in this principals meeting in May of 2002, one of the techniques is placing someone in a confinement box. So it's clear, and we sort of know this, that verbal authorization for many of these techniques had already been provided, by the Justice Department, by Rice signing off on it, Condoleezza Rice. So it lends more credence to suspicions that people have that the torture memo was simply written to more or less, which I believe you indicated, to just cover, what they were already doing, for quite some time, which was, torture. They were torturing, Zubayda. He was the first one subjected to this, and Soufan's partner. This is what I found very interesting, particularly when you put it into the context of this document. Soufan's partner out there, a FBI special agent named Steve Godin, when Soufan left, Godin said, "Yeah, I'm going to stay behind." And he told this to the FBI Inspector General when they did an investigation into these matters a couple of years ago. He said he was going to stay behind that month, May 2002, because he didn't have any moral objections to what the CIA contractor was doing to Zubayda, because he himself had gone through that in SERE training.
Oh, isn't that interesting? But he still, and I guess he wasn't worried at all about the legalities because there were none.
Right. If you start putting all these pieces together, and this is what's important, is really, if you take Jane Mayer's book, you look at what, some of the documents have, state, the contractor who was out there, was, James Mitchell, Air Force psychologist. He was partnered up with Bruce Jessen, former Mitchell and Jessen Associates, and he was one who kept waving around this paper saying, I have the legal authorization. I've got it. I'm able to do whatever I want out here, even though, people were objecting. And basically what he was waving around was a cable, and it was a cable that came from headquarters, supposedly, saying, yeah, you got the permission to use this. And, it's fascinating, and that's why this becomes, such an important piece of the historical, record, when we, years from now, when we really start, talking about the origins of this program, this torture program, we can now see, when things changed, what they were discussing. And I also do want to make it clear, they did look at other SERE documents, but this is the earliest one that we have, and it provides, the first look at, what they were discussing as early as May 2002. Let's not forget that, Zubayda was captured in Pakistan March 28th, flown to a black site, shortly thereafter. And around April 16th, Mitchell's partner, Bruce Jessen, that's when he started distributing this so-called draft exploitation plan. The military and the CIA had already been talking about these alternative set of techniques, but here you go. Here's the manual. This is what we're going to use. We're going to use this manual. And, what's really important to also note about this manual is that they stress, the instructors who are subjecting trainees to these methods, they stressed safety. And look, we need to make sure that our trainees don't fall into a state of learned helplessness, because that would damage them psychologically, physically and psychologically. So, one thing that if you recall, Rice has said this, I was assured that this was safe. Well, one of the techniques in here, which I had mentioned, which is cramped confinement, in the manual it said the trainee can only be in a confinement box for 20 minutes. Well, guess what? In the torture memo, it actually said up to 18 hours, depending on the size of the box.
Right, and they're worried about leaving an American trainee in there for very long, is that he might actually be tortured. I mean, it might the torture, rather than an inoculation against torture for him, right, training against it, it might actually just amount to torture and break him, and we don't want to do that.
Right, that's exactly it. So, how did they get from 20 minutes up to 18 hours? I don't have the answer. I have no idea. But that's the point that Colonel Steve Kleinman had made when during our interview, was that, look, there's nothing about this that is safe. How can Rice say that this is safe when we're putting them in a box for as much as between 2 and 18 hours? We only put our guys in here for 20 minutes, so they wouldn't fall into the state of learned helplessness.
And what exactly does that mean?
Well, learned helplessness is basically, where you just become so dependent on your captor. You're at their sort of whim, if you will. It's you're dependent on them for everything. And they did not really want the trainees to get into that state. But learned helplessness was, the basis of the entire program. So it was the exact opposite. This is
Winston Smith at the third act of the book 1984, where right, O'Brien, his torturer, becomes his father, his lover, his leader, Big Brother personified.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Scott.
Well, that's the American way. All right, I'm sorry, we're all out of time. Thank you very much for your time, as always, Jason. Jason Leopold, everybody, truthout.org.